My name is May Warren. I'm a reporter with the Toronto Star, part of the housing team. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what we do and the reporting that we do and how we use data and some kind of things that we wish we could do, or some databases that we kind of want to look into more and things like that. And it's kind of a very brief informal presentation, then we'll have lots of time for questions after. So just a little bit about me, give you some background. So I am a graduate of TMU, their Master of Journalism program, graduated in 2014-ish. And then I was an intern at the Toronto Star and then did a few different contracts and internships bouncing around a bit at the Guelph Mercury, which was a great local paper that unfortunately now is closed, doing kind of breaking news, crime, general news there. And then I worked at Metro with Luke, which was a great paper if you remember it. Did a lot of kind of urban affairs stuff, wrote about cycling and pedestrian safety, and did some really cool data projects as well there. Then I went back to the Star in 2018 when I was a breaking news reporter. So that's basically anything and everything. It could be crime, it could be murder scene, could be something about bike lanes, or a lot of times different data projects as well. And as part of that, I would write about housing from time to time. And it was always kind of one of my favorite topics to work on. And then I moved to the COVID team at the Star for about 2 years. I did a lot on vaccine equity, looking at different postal codes and neighborhoods and the vaccine uptake in different places across the city. And that was kind of a really rich area to do data projects as well. And then last September, I moved to the housing team. And I remember when I first joined the Star as an intern, like almost 10 years ago, there was one real estate reporter. And then eventually they added someone else to do kind of affordable housing type things. And now there's 4 of us. And the issue also spans other teams like our quick online desk and also the business team. So it's really a big area of priority that I think really reflects the housing crisis in the city and the region. So it's good to see that they're devoting resources to it. And we also can see from our internal analytics that those kinds of stories do really well and that people are reading them. And so the team spans everything from, real estate and interest rates and the business side of it to short-term rentals like Airbnb, tenants, demo evictions, condos, different levels of government, missing middle, all kinds of things. On our team, we have someone who does more real estate, another person who does a great job at the more affordable housing, TCHC, homelessness side of things. And I kind of span the two sometimes, kind of helping out wherever, doing different data projects, but also doing a lot on short-term rentals and kind of missing middle type stuff. Personally, I am a renter myself, and would love to buy, but like a lot of people in that kind of boat of probably not going to happen anytime soon in this environment. So yeah, a lot of those issues are very personal to me, and really resonate with me, and definitely feel very passionate about them. Just some recent data stories that I've worked on in the housing beat. I looked a lot at House Sigma when I first kind of started. It's not always the most scientific of data, but it is an interesting data source. On that site, you can see how much a home was listed for, but also how much it actually went for. You can see things like if the listing was terminated. So I did a couple stories with them, just asking House Sigma for their own data on how many terminated listings have you had lately? Is it going up? Things like that. How many have you had that are went for under asking? Stuff like that. So that's an interesting source, although you have to kind of go to them to get that data. My colleague Victoria Gibson and I also did a recent story about people living in their vehicles in the city. And it's actually started with one of our editors saw some RVs near a softball pitch where she plays and was just wondering what was going on. So went down to check that out and ended up talking to this man there who was really helpful and kind of just telling us, he was working, but he had an injury and was not working at the moment, but could still afford to live in the RV. And then we ended up just going to the city and asking them hey, have you seen do you have any numbers on this at all? It's not like a public data set, but we just asked them. And I think it was just a very simple streets to home survey that they had, but it did show a small increase in the number of people living in vehicles in the city, which is interesting because often you think of it as more of a US thing where the weather is warmer, where they don't have maybe as good of a public transit system and people are holding onto cars, even if they're giving up homes. But it was interesting to see a rise here in Toronto and made it into a kind of a feature. A lot of times we get people pitching stories. I think there's some curiosity about like what makes a story a good story. So definitely news value. If it's something that people are already talking about, or there's a big recent news development or something, that definitely helps. And breaking news would fall on that if there's some new announcement or something like that on the housing end. But also a lot of times, and these are kind of some of my favorite stories, is looking into data and coming up with conclusions from there, but then making it into a feature. And to do that, it's always great if we can find personal stories about people to kind of exemplify the trend. So if we're saying, hey, the number of people living in the RVs is going up, if we can find someone living in an RV to share what that actually feels like, what is their day-to-day, to lend that emotion so that it's not just the numbers, that's always kind of the goal. And it is hard to find because with housing, often people don't want to talk about the fact that they're having a tough time financially, or they're not able to make their mortgage payments or whatever. That's really where a lot of the reporting goes into it, is not only looking through data to find patterns or looking for news, but also looking for those personal stories and then convincing people to be willing to share it with us, which can be daunting. One data source that I found recently, there was actually like a public release about it, and maybe some of you noticed as well, is this rental registry. So I think it already existed in Quebec, but it kind of like soft launched in Ontario fairly recently. And basically it's people are just inputting how much rent they pay. And then if you go on the site, you can see a map and kind of navigate around and see in different neighborhoods, like, hey, someone's paying this much for a 1-bedroom on the waterfront, but this much in Trinity Bellwoods or whatever. So that was really interesting. And we just did a short story about the actual launch. But I've been trying to think about what else I could do with that. Is there something that we could use the data for to kind of pull out trends? Obviously, we all know rent is very high, and that if you've had your place for a while, that's and it was built before 2018, you're under rent control. That's an area where you would see better rents. But it just would be interesting to kind of, I've been meaning to go back to that a little bit and to see what I could do. And then just, I guess, a few topics that I'd love to know more about. Empty homes, for sure. Recently, there was the vacant homes tax in Toronto, and I think that's kind of an interesting hot topic as well. Would just love to know, everyone's always trying to get at, I think, how many empty homes there are, and without a little bit of data with the vacant homes tax, at least at a high level. But that's always an interesting one, because people often will say, well, there's so many empty homes, then there hasn't been a lot of data historically about that. Investor-owned homes as well, which is also very hard to get at. There is some StatsCan stuff on both of these, but that's another one. And demo evictions as well. So when there is an older apartment building or apartment above retail or something like that, and then that is torn down for a condo, that's also a really interesting area that I'd like to dive into a little bit more, and I've done a little bit of reporting on. But yeah, that's definitely a hot topic as well. We see people who have been living in their homes for years and then are forced to leave for a condo, and kind of how widespread that is that happening more, questions like that. And I guess some big questions that I don't expect anyone to know the answers to, but I think these are the kinds of questions that we dance around a lot. We kind of try and get it at different stories, and maybe some experts have ideas, but it would be, amazing to find more of a data or a hard edge in. But these are kinds of existential questions. Look around the city and you see so many cranes and you see so much construction, and there's so many, at least condos being built everywhere, which technically are a form of housing, but then no one has anywhere to live, right? So that's a really interesting tension. And I think a lot of us probably feel that if we've been evicted, if we've had a unit sold out from under us, if we've been trying to scrape together the down payment, things like that. Also, we're hearing now that it's more of a buyer's market, but you keep hearing from first-time buyers that they still can't afford anything because interest rates are higher. So like who is still buying at these prices? Like who is still able to offer more than the listing price when the interest rates are so high, and with the stress test, or maybe having to qualify at like 8 or 9% or something like. What is the buyer pool? I'm just really curious about that. And then of course everyone wants to know what's going to happen next. Is there a bubble? Will the bubble burst? That's kind of the $1,000,000 question. And we definitely have written lots of stories and kind of trying to forecast. And our editors are always wanting us to predict the future, which we can't do. But we're often writing stories where we're calling experts and asking them, what do you think is going to happen? Where are we going to go next? Is a big one, which I know is really hard to answer. Yeah, and I think that was pretty much it for the formal spiel. But yeah, very happy to open up to questions. Anyone?
I think this gentleman.
I had a short one. What do you mean by a demo?
Yeah, sorry, should have defined that. So, so I guess it's a term for when someone is in like an older building, like a rent controlled building, and the whole building is going to be torn down to build a new condo. So it's kind of the tenants there they are entitled to some compensation under, I think, a bylaw in the city, but they're displaced for a period of time. So it's kind of interesting issue.
Yeah. Well, so just for the people online, if you want to just drop a Q in the chat, and Adam will let us know, and then we can make sure everyone's getting. Oh, and on that note, we did get John.
I think there was also a person.
So we're gonna do one in the room, and then we can pass it off to John online.
I'm not sure if these questions are like are the questions you've discussed with your editors or whatnot, but I mean, do you have some method of or some way to collaborate with like colleagues in immigration or in like finance on these questions? Because these aren't only housing.
Good point. Like so many of the issues span multiple teams or multiple departments, and there's all these different aspects to them. So definitely, we have our housing team, but we will reach out to people on different teams, and they'll share information with us, and we do like joint things as well, for sure, because it's definitely they're wider than just the one issue.
You said you guys use. Hold on, there was a question online.
Yeah. Well, John, if you wanna.
Yeah. Are you guys covering the Swansea Mews? It's a project, fairly large project at the corner of Windermere and the Queensway, just short of the Humber River. For those who don't know, a couple of years ago, the buildings had deteriorated to a point that the city felt it needed to evacuate the entire complex, and I think a couple of hundred people at least were moved into temporary housing. And since then, it doesn't look like the city has done anything at all with Swansea Mews, and there's a very large complex there that is essentially appears to be sitting empty. And I wondered if the fate of Swansea Mews or maintenance more generally in Toronto community housing was something you guys were working on. That's it.
Yeah, for sure. My colleague Victoria Gibson, who does more exclusively like affordable housing, tenants, CCHC, and that kind of thing, she did a big feature on Swansea Mews, I think last year, kind of exploring that. And she also, I think, touched on it for a recent story that she did that was part of a series about kids and kind of how the city is failing kids. I think it was a kid that had lived there and had to be moved or something like that. But it is a good point. There's always ongoing reporting and checking back in about especially that situation, but TCHC maintenance in general, and that she is really well versed in that, and is always kind of keeping her finger on that, for sure.
You said you guys data to sort of inform these decisions. What does that sort of like tech stack look like? And in what capacity are you guys like using some sort of like AI or data analytics services?
what we'll do is we'll, get a data source maybe from open data at the city or something like that, or we'll get it from a Freedom of Information request, or we'll just email and ask someone for it from the city or something like that. But it will usually just honestly be as simple as like an Excel spreadsheet. We'll share in like a Google Doc. And that way like multiple people can work on it. Few people I would say have like training in like sophisticated data analysis or programs or things like that. But you can do a lot even just with Excel. A lot of the times it's honestly just there will be a data set that exists and it's in a really not user-friendly format. And it's just taking that time to maybe combine it with another data set and then run like a simple pivot table or something like that. And then that generates something like a high level headline that then makes a good story. So yeah, it's very simple kind of data gathering method. Sometimes you end up doing a bit of like data entry even to get something in a database that you can use and manipulate. And it just takes the time to do that. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, nothing fancy, just Excel usually most of the time. We do have a graphics team that can help a little bit with very complex things.
I think our pin was in the chat. Yeah.
Come up later. So my first is, I don't know if you covered the that was affected by the AGI. But I don't know if that's something easy to access as a journalist, or whether it's the sort of thing where you have to go like get a tenant to give it to you, or like go to some weird office and beg for it in hard copy. So I'm curious your experience with the LTB and whether they're good at sharing data or not.
Maria, my colleague, has done more on them, but I've done a little bit. And I found that they're not very helpful. And also like with a lot of agencies, you'll ask a question and they just won't be keeping things in a way that is easily searchable, or they're not able to answer like high level questions like that. I remember there was a story that I did about landlord and tenant board. It was a case of a tenant or someone who was renting an Airbnb for a long period of time, like months, and then the landlord had a dispute with them, and there was like kind of an eviction process. So I covered that case, and I didn't get any of the end information from the actual board. It was from like other people who were following the case and sources and people like that. So yeah, I would say there's a lot of improvement there in terms of like data sharing, not just from them, but from most agencies, I would say.
This moment. Yep. Adam, if you want to kind of organize the ones remaining online.
I tried to, but there was a signal breakdown, but I will try again.
Okay, I think it's Eugene is next.
Okay. What Imagery said was Toronto Star's podcast. This Matters is covering the latest. That in the latest episode, I'm assuming it's the social housing thing that I mentioned before. And the next person that I think is Peter KH has a question.
Sorry,
Hi. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question. It's Eugene here. Thanks for the talk, by the way. I'm sorry, I'm actually driving. I'm just pausing the road right now. I'm curious if you have a collection of these links of data sources, as well as some of these outstanding questions, just somewhere on your outlet that you could share with everybody, so that someone like me who is involved with working with data can take a look at the potential opportunities for combining or just looking through these data sets and identifying some of the key questions that you wonder if they can be answered by some of these data sets. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have them all right now, but like, for example, the rental registry one, I have a link for that. I don't know. Yeah, I could also send them out
If you
later.
want to share them with me, I could get
Yeah.
them to our.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. I'll send to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we had Arpan was next.
Hello. Yeah, I had a question about so like the city of Toronto has a lot of great programs for trying to expand the housing stock. So there was one called Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods, which led to some bylaws being changed, which made multiplexes legal. But the issue is that the like City Hall does a great job in covering the bylaw amendments and like all sorts of studies that they need to do. But once the bill is passed, there's just radio silence. Do you think it would be a good idea for journalists to focus on that? Like, I know there are other issues that come up when someone who has a single family house tries to expand and tries to follow the new bylaws. There's still pushback from like their neighbors. So I think that's probably one area where journalists can really help. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
For sure. And to your point there's a lot of, bylaw policy changes that happen at City Hall and they get headlines when they happen. But I think a big part of our job is, as you say, following up, digging into it, looking at the examples. How does the policy happen in real life? And are there problems with it that we can highlight to try and, encourage a discussion about how to make it better, all of that stuff. So, and there's definitely been lots of recent changes, like with the multiplex bylaw change to kind of make those legal across the city and stuff like that. So that's a big part of where our team comes into play. City Hall will do the big changes, or we might help with that, but then we're always thinking like, how is this going? What can we follow up on here? People will write in and they'll tell us that they're having problems, that they're, the vacant homes tax is not rolling out the way that it's supposed to, or whatever it is. So definitely we'll try and follow up where we can there.
You had yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I just wanted to know if you've covered the housing situation from the perspective of wage growth over the years, and how the insights from with regards and in questions you brought up, so how everyone looking for a house and really find, well, supposedly there's lots of homes being built, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I did a project with Victoria and also her colleague Tess Kalinowski, who now has sadly retired. She was great. Last year, looking at starter homes and how the idea of the starter home has kind of changed over the years within the GTA, that also looked at, I think, wages as well as part of that, but along with the rising prices and what kind of a person who's starting out actually afford. So we've done a little bit of it, and it does come into play, when we're talking about pricing and first-time buyers and all that kind of thing. But yeah, there's definitely always more room for that, and it's kind of a cross-disciplinary issue for sure. So it's a good point.
Peter had a question.
Yeah. Peter, if you wanna, sorry about the getting you cut off there earlier, but if you wanna go now.
No, that's okay. So thanks so much, May, for giving a presentation. I have two questions. The first one is, do you have any advice about ways for people like myself, like I'm a housing advocate, to get in contact with developers? I have tried a couple things, like trying to email them directly, and I haven't yet had any success. And the second question, which is maybe an idea for a something to write stories about, is, have you guys looked into the supply chain related to construction? So like, is there something which is like, is there a shortage in a particular component which is used in construction, which is driving up costs up for like housing?
Sorry, your first question is about how to get in touch with developers. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, my best advice is just to kind of make sure that you're emailing the right person, which can be tough. Sometimes there'll be like a general email or a marketing person email or something that won't get back to you. If there's any way for you to find the email of the head of the firm or someone who's more senior, personally, that's helpful for us sometimes to kind of like escalate it a little bit. And yeah, sometimes their email address is public if you kind of Google around a little bit. Other times you can maybe even try and guess it if you know their name and then you know the other email addresses for their company, like, you know, first letter, last name, like that type of thing. So it takes a little bit of work, but yeah. And if you can find a phone number, you can always try and cold call, which kind of catches people off guard for sure. But it's a little trickier to find. But yeah, and then yeah, if you have those contacts, maybe just hold on to them and then you can share them with other people next time you get in touch with whatever developer on whatever issue. You can even start with a contact list or something. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's practically kind of what we do. We're trying to find hard to reach people. And then your other question about the supply chain, yeah, that definitely comes up a lot. We've done kind of general stories looking at supply for sure. Also looking at rising costs, like we know construction costs are up with inflation and also material costs. I haven't heard that there's like one specific issue, more multiple issues, like the cost of everything is just up. But definitely that's a good point. It's an area to look into for sure.
One last, oh, Gabe, actually, you haven't had an opportunity yet.
So I have a perception, and this is like I don't know, I have, you know, this isn't backed up by data or anything, but that like there have been a lot more stories about the problems of housing in Toronto, like since the municipal election, since interest rates went up. So I guess I'm just curious about like, do other people also like perceive that? And like those two things, are there other reasons? Like, where does the appetite for more housing coverage come from? And I'm anticipating like, how do we make it stay?
Yeah, like looking over the last maybe 10 years that I've been a reporter, like I was always interested in these issues, but they're getting a lot more attention and spotlight now. And I think part of it is that it's impacting more people, like even people who, you know, maybe they own their own home and it's not something that they live and breathe. They have their kids who can't afford a home, who are being evicted or whatever. Many people are dealing with rental issues. Many people now are starting to suffer, worrying about mortgages and making payments because of interest rates. So yeah, that's a big macro factor that definitely impacts it, the interest rates and the city hall developments. Also, to be honest, we can see that the housing stories are very well read. So that generates more interest for more stories, which is good. But I think that's just a reflection of the climate right now in the city, and that it's something that is on everyone's mind and is a really central concern. So everybody is looking for more information about it. And it's, you know, even like when you go to like a party or something, people are talking about it. It's a really charged conversation right now, and I think it's kind of a question, but I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's a few things, but definitely we can see an appetite in the leadership for these stories.
Last one over here.
So my other question is, for the Toronto, your in case cleaning up public data or compiling from different sources, or does it just like sort of the results in your store? Really 400 sales I need, so I'm curious how to about sharing and publishing it.
A scenario where we're asking people to pay for a data set that we've obtained. And most of it is public data, but it just kind of takes work to get in a format or to get it to us or whatever. It depends on what kind of story it is. If it's a smaller story, oftentimes we'll just say like, this is what the data says in the story, blah, blah, blah. This is the headline, whatever. If someone asked me for it, I probably would send it to them as long as it didn't take like weeks and weeks of my time to do it. On the bigger stories where it does take a really long time, we have published databases to go along with it, like to have an even searchable database. This is not housing related, but when I was on the breaking desk, we did a big project about OHIP billing and the top OHIP billers in the province, which a colleague had spent years getting that information through Freedom of Information requests and piecing it together. I just kind of came in at the end. But with that story, we did a series of stories, but with that, there was a searchable database. So you could look up and see, you know, whatever, are they one of the top billers, like things like that. So you can kind of manipulate it for yourself. So I actually didn't know if the Globe was asking people to pay for. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that at the Star at this time. My preference would be to be as transparent as possible, because it is, you know, largely public data, and we're, you know, working to get it out there in the public realm. And a lot of times our graphics team can help with that, just doing kind of a more user-friendly version of a spreadsheet or simple database, basically.